So, A Universal Time New Universe launched about a week ago as of the recording of this video. Just for reference and everything I'll be saying, this will be recorded on the 8th of September. Should hopefully be going up on the 9th of September, just so that they can't change anything in between me making the review and then you seeing it. Obviously, if you're watching this long after the 8th of September 2021, then there are going to be, hopefully, some things that have changed since then, as I can't really see the game just suddenly stop getting updates out of nowhere, and considering it's in its heyday right now, that probably won't be happening anytime soon. And frankly, I hope it doesn't happen anytime soon. But with all that being said, with the game being out for about a week, and with me clocking in a little over 70 1v1 games, which I know isn't a ton, but I also don't think it's rookie numbers, I think I'm qualified to put out my full review of the game as it stands as of the 8th of September. So the way I'm going to be rolling this out is I'll be starting off with the things that I like about the game, I'll get into the things that I don't like about the game, and then at the very end of it, I'll give it a number score. Albeit that number score probably won't mean a whole lot, as I'm sure a lot will change in the next few months. But at least for right now, that's what I think. If I feel like I really need to do a re-review later, then I will not hesitate to do so. With that being said, I think I've done plenty of introductions, so we can jump into the things that I like about AUT. The first thing, and definitely the most impressive all around in this game, are the animations. The AUT Animations team did an absolutely phenomenal job and should give themselves a pat on the back for the work they did with the animations and effects for all of the stands and abilities in this game. Just about everything that you can find and use in the game looks phenomenal, and I think you would be hard-pressed to find anyone that would disagree with that statement. It's very clear that a lot of time and effort went into the animations, and I think it definitely shows in the gameplay. Even subtle things like projectiles hitting the wall and knocking some chunks out of the wall were represented here. It's small stuff like that that could easily be forgotten about, but aren't. And for that level of detail, I think it definitely needs to be noted and appreciated. Because when it comes to small stuff like that, a lot of the time, it kind of flies under the radar. So once again, a serious hats off to everyone that was involved in working on the visuals of AUT, because it's nothing short of amazing. Moving on from that, the next thing that I think is really well done is that there's plenty of free-to-play opportunities. This is something that I think is heavily slept on here, and I think a lot of people probably don't really recognize because they don't pay too much attention to this kind of stuff. But the opportunities for free-to-play players to play the game at a relatively or completely equal level to people who pay money is something that I think is very important when it comes to these games. And since Roblox is a free games platform, you always have to have a careful balance because obviously the developers still need to make some money. Only problem being, some games decide to take the route of blatantly pay to win in order to make that money, and thankfully, AUT is not one of those games. By default, you get 6 stand storage slots to work with. 6 is certainly not a small number when compared to other games. Oh, YBA. And so when you consider that and the fact that your bank also has 6 slots to store any of your items, I would say that the AUT developers are very generous when it comes to handing out free options for people to use. The next 2 reasons will be on the same kind of vein of these free-to-play opportunities, but the next one is reasonably priced game passes, which is another thing that I think slightly flies under the radar here. Aside from the item notifier, which in my opinion isn't even worth it to begin with, all of the game passes seem plenty reasonably priced to me. So much so that I was willing to buy the extra stand storage slots out of principle alone. Yes, I 100% could have just gotten one of my 16 alternate accounts I needed for YBA to store stands on it, but I felt like the amount that's given to you as it is in the game warrants them deserving my money. For reference, I've not bought a single stand storage slot in YBA and have not bought spec storage on any of my accounts in YBA either, because in my opinion, both of those are horrible business practices and outrageously overpriced. AUT does not have that problem, and I'm truly impressed at their generosity and what they decided to do with it. And on that same front, once again, moving over to my next reason, and that's there's no paywalled content in this game. Something that always rubbed me the wrong way when I was playing Troublesome Battlegrounds is that they had characters that were straight up locked behind paid content. Now, I understand, once again, the game's free, they gotta make their money somehow, but it can just leave you feeling cheated sometimes when you lose to a character that you have no way of obtaining because it's locked behind a paywall. The next one's pretty small, but it's that there's an actual shop in this game. Albeit there's not too much in the shop, and I hope that changes. There's plenty of items that they could put in the shop, so I don't really know why it's so empty. But regardless, there's actually a shop, as there should be. And finally, the last thing on the positives, and that's developer transparency. This is something, as a player coming from YBA, is night and day, and it's not even close, and I think anyone that's been playing YBA for a long time and has come over to this game can attest to this. YBA, developer transparency, might as well not even exist. So for anyone who hadn't played YBA or wasn't involved with YBA and is now playing this game, it honestly might not be that huge of a deal, but for me, it definitely is. With YBA, sometimes it's hard to even tell what developers know about, whether they know that there are game-breaking bugs, whether they know the game is unplayable, whether they know about balance problems. You have no idea because they don't say anything. The AUT developers are constantly updating on their Discord what's coming in future updates, what's getting fixed, and just generally paying attention to player feedback, something that you just don't see in YBA. And I don't mean to just make this a direct comparison to YBA, but I think developer transparency in any game is an important factor, and AUT absolutely does not have a problem with developer transparency. And I think that's something that should be noted. With that last positive, we're gonna start moving over to the negatives and what I think is actually wrong with the game, and some of those reasons, albeit I've already covered in my first impressions, and a lot of them hold true. But regardless, I'm going to be restating all of those here as well as some others. First of all, this game is really buggy. Once again, this is one of those things that might not be a problem past the 8th of September. I'd say if you give it around a month or two, most of the bugs will be fixed. At least it seems like they will be based on the developer's pace on fixing them. But as it is right now, bugs are everywhere with everything. It seems like every single character has some sort of bug with it. 1v1s gets bugged all the time, quests are bugged and still don't work. It's nuts. To try to put it into perspective, I tried doing the World Over Heaven quest, I finished it, it gave me the diary, I used it, nothing happened, and it ate my diary. I did the quest in order to get soul 3 separate times, on every single occasion it not working. For anyone who's wondering how to get soul right now, which you shouldn't because the stand kind of sucks anyway, but regardless, you have to kill Dio with Star Platinum while having the Tales of the Universe in your inventory, equip it and hit yes, and you'll get soul. The quest doesn't work, don't even try it. I also got Tusk Act 4 and Made in Heaven, both of which got randomly reset by a data wipe, so that's pretty cool. Overall, quests were just, and still kind of are just, a mess. It was even worse at launch, and it was very, very, very clear that they rushed themselves to meet the we need to launch at the end of August deadline, which is something that they should not have done by any rights, and I think it's made very clear by the amount of bugs that are present. Some of those bugs seemingly unforgivable in my eyes. There seems to be a lot of bugs that stop quests from being able to complete, and those bugs feel like they should have been tested. I don't see how the bugs could exist without some sort of lack of testing. If you take a stand and you use an item to evolve the stand, and then you use the item and it doesn't evolve the stand, then it doesn't work. That seems pretty self-explanatory to me. Now mind you, all of this is coming from someone who's not a developer. So in all likelihood, it's not that simple. But if it is that simple, that is a serious problem, and none of those things should be forgiven and forgotten so easily. I think there are a lot of blatant fanboys that came out of the woodwork when the game released, and were extremely forgiving of the development team behind this game for all the bugs. I am not one of those people. I don't think that the disastrous launch of this game should be forgiven so easily, and I really hope that the developers took the disastrous launch to heart, learned from it, and won't be continuing to make the same mistakes in the future. Because if they continue to rush content like they did with the launch, then it's going to continue launching as a buggy, unbalanced mess. And that's exactly what the launch of this game was, and if you say otherwise, you're doing nothing but lying to yourself. Moving on from the bugs, we're going to get into combat inconsistency and imbalance. Combat is a topic that I think a lot of people bring up as a positive for AUT, and as someone who's played the 1v1s mode for a very good amount of time, I can't really agree with you there. A lot of people say that combat feels smooth, and while I agree with you that combat can feel smooth, it's incredibly inconsistent, and I think that's the biggest problem with AUT's combat right now. But my words don't really speak here. I think actions speak louder than words, so I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by inconsistency. The biggest problem with AUT is its inconsistent hitboxes and stun. In a game that's seemingly supposed to be competitive because it does have a ranking system, and what I can only assume is a matchmaking system that reflects that ranking, which I'll be talking about later, the game's comboing system and stun system is incredibly just seemingly random. Players at the end of time stops and moves like time erase just randomly teleport around despite clearly being in one spot a second ago. People that are getting hit by a barrage jitter around a lot, and a lot of the time just randomly fall out of it. Certain moves that should true combo into each other don't because of lag and latency. A big thing that comes to my mind is Sans. Sans is a character that I've already talked about on this channel, but something that I didn't talk about is Sans' incredibly inconsistent combo tools. I can't even tell what's supposed to combo and what's not because of it. When Sans uses his end move, when it finishes, there's an amount of stun after the player falls to the ground. When playing against a player with either good frame rate or good connection, I can't determine which one is the problem, this works just fine and you can true combo stuff out of end. When playing against someone with bad connection or bad FPS, they kind of hover in the air and slowly fall back down, and by the time they've hit the ground, the stun is over. Same thing with Bone Guard. Sans' Bone Guard has enough stun against someone with perfect ping and perfect connection that if you use it and they get knocked up into the air and fall back down, you can true combo M1s after it. With bad connection or bad FPS, my favorite ability in the game right now, Shadow Dio, also suffers from this. Shadow Dio has some really massive true combos that can do a ton of damage. Only problem being, sometimes people just lag out of these combos. Or you use a stand uppercut, which shoots them into the air, and once again, they take so long to fall back down that by the time they do, they can move again. Overall, AUT combat feels like it could be smooth, but it just isn't smooth, because people are teleporting and lagging around all over the place, that overall the feeling of the game just devolves into, a lot of the time, people mashing buttons. Initially, when I first started, I didn't think it was going to be like this, and I thought that a lot of characters would just be blatantly overpowered because a lot of the characters I was using had these crazy true combos. But most of those true combos don't work because people are lagging around all the time. So I don't know, maybe people have had a different experience than I have. The other thing that's pretty big is a lot of moves, it seems like the developers couldn't decide whether they should be positive on hit or negative on hit, and a lot of them don't make sense because of that. There's a lot of moves in the game that end you neutral on hit, which basically means that whichever stand has a faster option wins. And going up against a lot of different stands, it means that if you use that move against them, you just get punished for it. King Crimson comes to mind with this in particular. If you use King Crimson's Impale move, the end of the move puts you neutral with your opponent. That means that the opponent can use a move and so can you at the exact same time. If you're going up against barrage stands, their barrage comes out faster than any of your other moves, and cancel any of your other moves. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you use the move against a barrage stand, you get barraged every time. Something like that feels like it should be positive for the King Crimson player, but it's not. And there are a lot of moves like this, where you just have this awkward moment where it feels like you should be positive on hit, but you're either negative on hit or neutral on hit, which ends up getting you punished. I don't know how many people really understand exactly what I'm talking about here, but for those of you who do and who've played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I don't need to elaborate any further. As for the imbalance part of Inconsistency and Imbalance, I think this just kind of comes with the territory. It's not a surprise to anyone that for the last week, Goku has just been blatantly overpowered, and it's not even close. I think at the very least, the AUT developers attempting to make everything balanced with each other is at least valiant, but so far, things haven't been looking too great. And the ability to actually make things balanced also seems to be hard-pressed considering the inconsistency of combat. How are you supposed to know what's overpowered and what's not if a certain ability is overpowered against opponents that have good connection or good FPS and worthless against others? Sans has some serious combo potential against people that have good connection and good FPS, but against someone that doesn't, you basically automatically lose. So do you take that into consideration when balancing? I don't know. Frankly, I think the thing that kind of irks me here is that YBA, for the most part, does not have this problem. Maybe it's because of the matchmaking thing that I'll be talking about in a minute, but overall, when I play YBA, I would say 8 out of 10 matches, I get up against someone that the ping is playable, and I don't feel like they're constantly flying out of my moves over and over again. AUT, it's the exact opposite. It feels like 80% of my matches, I'm going up against someone from Australia. And that can be really obnoxious. I quite honestly don't know if their connections or frame rates are actually bad or if it's just a problem of the game itself. But overall, balancing the current PvP system seems impossible, and the inconsistencies make it so a lot of the time I just don't want to play because people are flying around just mashing buttons. Not that there isn't any strategy at all, but I think a lot of the strategy goes down the toilet when people just start mashing and it works. Finally, moving on from that, and we've got to talk about matchmaking. Matchmaking is something that I'm not entirely sure of at all how it works, but so far I can tell you that it is not great in my opinion. The matchmaking is fast, but that's about all it is. I think the matchmaking is mostly based on your rank, and I think that might be the reason that there are problems, but I don't know for sure, so most of what I'm going to be saying here is going to be conjecture and anecdotes. As I've already said, I would wager to say that around 8 out of every 10 games I play, I'm playing against someone who's lagging all over the place, falls out of my moves constantly, and overall it just is not fun to play. I think the biggest problem here is that I can't tell if it's between frame rate or connection. I really have no idea. What my current suspicion is that the matchmaking system takes more into consideration your ranking to try to get you a more fair match than it does your connection in order to get you a fluid match. And if that is the case, I think that that needs to change, or at the very least there needs to be an introduction of a mode that ignores your rank and prioritizes connection. Because for me, playing in the ranked mode right now, a lot of the time feels miserable. I think it's probably safe to ignore my personal complaint that most of my matchmaking is against people blatantly trying to cheese, or people who are just obviously trying to play towards the meta, because I'm at a high enough rank for that to be most of the players that I run across. I will say, just as a personal complaint, it's quite annoying for me, especially when trying to get footage for things that I don't really know how to use. I got ranked because I was sweating really hard with Shadow Dio, which is a character that I do know how to play, and I initially tried getting the footage here with King Crimson, and that stand, on top of not being all that great, is a stand that I don't really know how to use, and overall I just got obliterated 5 times in a row and called it a day. Like I said, I can't say for sure about any of this because I don't know how the matchmaking works, but what I will say is having me being completely locked off from trying out new things in the 1v1s mode without just getting demolished because my rank from using something else is too high is something that I'm not really a huge fan of. YBA's matchmaking is seemingly completely random, and I personally prefer that, but I can totally understand why people would think the other way, and I don't fault them at all for liking the current matchmaking system. All I can say here is if it is not prioritizing connection above all else, that's a problem and leads for bad user experience. Moving on from matchmaking, and we're going to jump into rushed, poorly tested changes. This does lump itself in with another reason that I didn't actually set as its own reason because it only applies to me, but we'll get there when we get there. It's very clear to me that the developers are comfortable pushing forward rushed, poorly tested changes before anyone's even taken a good look at them. And the reason that I know this is because of the recent changes with Sands. Sands I complained about a few days ago, and within almost 2 hours of me uploading that, someone made a poll in the AUT Discord with nerfs and buffs to Sands, a lot of them being things I discussed in my video, and then within another 2 to 3 hours after that, there was a bunch of changes implemented to Sands. Let me tell you that there is no possible way that these changes could have been thought out, pulled on, added to the game, tested, and then put in an update within a few hours, and not come out with a bunch of bugs. That screams out to me poorly tested and needed more time. And unsurprisingly, there were some bugs. A pretty massive one that involves the stun that Sands now gets when he gets hit by an attack and dodges it, which basically made it so if you got hit by a bunch of attacks in the row, or I don't exactly know how to recreate it, but what you need to know is that the Sands player would get stuck in their slowed down state and they would just be easy pickings. I was gonna make a quick follow-up video to my initial Sands video after I saw the changes, but I hopped into 1v1s, I played 2 games, I got stuck in place and died on 3 stocks in both of the games I played, and was like, you have gotta be kidding me. Stuff like this should not, and in my opinion, cannot happen. Changes should be properly tested and properly thought out, and shouldn't just be rushed out the door. And on that same kind of vein, a negative reason that I'm not including in my little list here, but I do think I need to mention, is the quick decision to just immediately listen to something I said without seemingly thinking too hard about it, or just listening to content creators in general. And this is going to be more anecdotes. So if you don't like anecdotes and you think they hold no weight, then feel free to tune all this out and skip ahead. I was reading through a lot of the comments on my AUT Sands video, and there were some people saying that every single video that Infernasu has put out has gotten things nerfed or buffed, and my Sands video immediately got something nerfed or buffed. At least I assume it did. I obviously can't say for sure, but I think it's safe to assume that. Now mind you, I'm coming from an environment where I was never listened to the main developer of the game at any point. They ignore pretty much everything I have to say all the time as far as I'm aware. I've never spoken to them. I've never had any interaction with them really at all. And the only way that I've ever gotten any positive changes done in the game is through a game of telephone with a bunch of different people to communicate it to people like Uzu. And so I think it's pretty important to note that coming from an environment where I was just ignored to an environment where I was seemingly trusted without question is a little bit jarring. But I think the main problem is that whole trusted without question thing, and the fact that YouTubers seem to be able to nerf and buff things at will. And personally, I think that that's a problem, and it makes me skeptical of doing reviews on things that I like, because I fear that, oh, I'll showcase something I like, and then it will get instantly nerfed into the floor, because maybe people think it's unfair, or I'm showcasing something that's broken, who knows. I didn't include it in the negative reasons because I don't think it's a reason that anyone's going to have to deal with other than myself, but I do think it's something that I should be noting down here, that I honestly do not think that YouTubers should have as much power as we seem to here. But hey, that's just my 2 cents. Finally, the last negative reason that I have for AUT is the huge lack of in-game information. This is something that I absolutely covered in my initial review of the game, or I guess my initial first impressions. It wasn't really a review. But regardless, the point stands to this day, the lack of in-game information is still absolutely present. Yes, the tutorial NPC has more to say, but overall, if you want to know what you're doing, a lot of the time you either need to take shots in the dark or look it up online. And in my opinion, that is not very good game design. Things like how to obtain certain stands, what items you need for specific quests, and what your moves are for specific abilities should all be information that you should be able to get while you're in the game. As for moves for your stand, I think that should just be a menu in the menu's option. You pull up the menu, you click a thing, and it tells you what each move does, whether it guard breaks, ignores block, or is blockable, and how long each cooldown is. Simple information like that should be available to the players, and they shouldn't have to have some outside resource or mash every single key on their keyboard in order to figure out what their moves do. As for how to obtain things, I think it would be cool if there was a lore master NPC or something around the map that told you what specific things did when you found them. The Tales of the Universe item is something that a normal player is going to have absolutely no idea what it does. It doesn't tell you that you can use it to get the Dawn quest. It doesn't tell you that you can use it after killing Dio with Star Platinum in order to get Soul. It doesn't tell you any of that, and you can't figure any of that out unless you've looked it up online or get lucky. Albeit with the context clues for the Dawn's quest, you can actually figure that out. But when it comes to Soul, killing Dio with Star Platinum, holding the book out, and then saying, yes, you want to learn the path of the cosmos or whatever, is a complete crapshoot. Who's ever going to know how to do that? The fact that you have no idea what some of these items do is a little bit strange, and I feel like that information should be available to the player somewhere in the game. If you're relying on third-party information sources to figure out how things work, that's just a little concerning as a whole. And with that wraps up all the negative things I have to say about the game. So all that's really left here is to give the game its final score and talk about my closing thoughts. So, the moment that you've all been waiting for, the final score for AUT, with 5 being the average score, so none of this 7 out of 10 is average nonsense. I think that I would give AUT a 6 out of 10. I think in about 2 or 3 weeks, this game will probably bump itself up to a 7 if the developers continue at the current pace. And I think it definitely has the potential of being an 8 or a 9 game if some of the major issues that I don't necessarily think will be addressed are addressed. But as things stands right now, as of the 8th of September 2021, I think the game is a 6, slightly above average. Just for reference, for anyone that's outraged by that, I would give YBA's current state a 4 or a 5 because I think that game has a lot of problems right now, and the biggest problems that it's had for a long time still have not gotten fixed. Those being developer transparency and bugs everywhere. So overall, like I said, I think AUT has a lot of room to grow, and I think it can absolutely become an incredible game. And I personally feel like the biggest things that are holding it back are the combat inconsistencies. Hands down, that's the thing that when I go and I boot up the game, I think to myself, yeah, I think I'll pass on playing this today. Because there's nothing worse than learning and labbing out a huge true combo that you've figured out, and then having it just not work because someone's FPS sucks and their computer's bad, or their internet connection is unstable. And obviously some of that stuff is to be expected, but you would think it would be at least a little bit more consistent. When I go into YBA 1v1s with Anubis, which is effectively any other fighting games character, and I think if they just threw YBA's Anubis into AUT, it would probably fit in just fine. But that stand, while having problems every once in a while, when I go into matchmaking with it, I don't feel like I'm as completely helpless and mashing buttons as I do in AUT. People really just go online and push buttons and it works. And I can't even fault them for doing it because if you don't go online and mash buttons, then you're not going to have a consistent experience against everyone. Some people you can go in and use your true combo and it'll work. And some people you'll go in and you use a true combo and it doesn't work. And stuff like that is just incredibly frustrating. It unironically makes me just turn off the game. When I have a 1v1s match and I play it, even if I win, if by the end of the game, some guy has TP'd out of my barrage or walked out of my barrage 4 or 5 times in a match, I didn't have fun, win or lose. And stuff like that, if it sticks around, I just don't know how much longer I'll be able to enjoy the game. It's all in the hands of the developers and what they decide to do with the information that's given to them over time. With that though, I think that's my closing thoughts completed, and I've already scored the game, so I'm done. If you enjoyed the video, liked listening to me talk about all these problems and what I liked and all that nonsense, you can leave a like, subscribe. If you didn't enjoy the video and think I was too harsh, which I imagine a lot of you will be, don't do those things. Feel free to dislike. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.